So hi, everybody. Welcome. Today, our panel is focused on disaster risk reduction, in particular, the much more locally focused disaster risk reduction and efforts at supporting community efforts. And I think it's important to draw that distinction between leading and supporting. And I think that's what you'll hear as well from some of our panelists. I will go ahead and just sort of name our panelists and their affiliations. I ask them to please share a little bit more about themselves if they would like in their presentations, and we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. You're welcome to either raise your hand or speak up, or also to use the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat and we'll use that as a means of talking with the three panelists. I'm Alessandra Geralaman. I'll be moderating. I'm an associate professor of emergency management at Jacksonville State University, also a facilitator with the Lowlander Center. My work is in hazard mitigation, climate adaptation, and disaster justice. And I was one of the founders of NHMA many years ago at this point, and I'm glad to be here today. Our three speakers today: first, we'll have Jessica Ludi. She is a flood risk program manager at the San Francisco District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Second, we will have Jennifer Santos Hernandez. She is the academic chair of the Graduate Certificate in Planning for Disaster Risk Reduction at the Salvador Padilla Escabi Graduate School of Planning, University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras. And finally, we'll hear from Greg Buenel. He's the program director for the Caribbean Green Technology Center at the University of the Virgin Islands. Again, thank you very much. A reminder to please use the chat if you have questions. And I will go ahead and pass it over to you first, Jessica.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Alessandra, for having me here. And actually, I'm not speaking to any slides, so I wonder if Jennifer might stop sharing the slides. Awesome. Thanks. I'm Jessica Ludi, as Alessandra said. I work with the Army Corps of Engineers in the San Francisco district, so that's why I just chose the cool Golden Gate Bridge background. I've been with the Corps for about 2.5, actually 3 years next month. And I mentioned that to say I haven't always worked here, and it was sort of my dream to get myself years, because my approach was, we need to do better. We're, whether it's flood risk management, or whether it's environmental justice or environmental sustainability and resilience, et cetera, we need to do better. We're not doing better. And I think the place where I can do that is in the federal government. So that's sort of how I ended up here. And I guess just kind of to dive right into it, it's no secret that the federal government doesn't have the best reputation for working with communities or advancing equity or community-driven planning decisions, those sorts of things. And in fact, there is a lot of history and research and work out there that points to the historical government practices and policies that created a number of disparities and inequities in the first place. And then it's the federal government's current practices and policies that can and have and do exacerbate those inequities. For example, some of the most common ones, or ones that you hear complaints about, are the benefit cost analysis. And the Army Corps of Engineers relies on this in large part to determine where they will construct projects, or what kind of projects they will construct, or whether they will at all. And that comes from a 1936 law saying, it was the Flood Control Act of 1936 that said that the benefits of federal flood control projects have to outweigh the costs. And what that ends up doing is, inadvertently, you put resources and mitigation projects in areas that already have resources at the expense of communities and areas that don't have resources. And actually, the same system also makes it difficult to justify projects that have nature-based solutions, for example, because we don't do a great job valuing or quantifying benefits of nature-based solution either. So those are just a couple of ways in which our current policies and practices, they're rooted in 1936, what was going on in the nation in 1936. We weren't centering equity, that's for sure. And that's a way that we can just sort of continue to perpetuate inequity, even if we don't mean to. And then kind of the third piece of this that I think about is a lot of planning processes. And this is at the Army Corps of Engineers. It's also I come from the private sector where we supported a lot of other local and state agencies. So I feel like I see this universally with infrastructure planning, but the time by which we engage and talk with the community members, especially those who will be most affected, we're already pretty far down the line, right? And it's kind of a check the box. And I think there's probably also a lot of practitioners out there, right, who've had public meetings and seen them as a nuisance, or it's the first piece of the budget to get cut when you're running into budget shortfalls or time crunches. And so I think just, historically, we've got these the policies that exacerbate the inequity. And then in the process, we don't do a great job meaningfully engaging the people who will be most affected. And then finally, the practice of hazard mitigation and flood risk management is not as diverse or representative or inclusive as the communities we are serving. So there are probably a number of people making planning decisions, design decisions that will affect communities that don't really reflect the needs of those communities and may cause unintended harm. And then, there can just be a little bit of resistance to change in a lot of our agencies that have been around for a while. And I am hopeful, which is why I'm here. And it's kind of the foundation upon which I've gotten to know Alessandra. And I will say that with the Biden administration's executive orders that they passed in 2021, plus the Justice 40 initiative, a number of these, if you're not familiar with them, they talk about advancing equity. They talk about serving underserved communities. They talk about accessibility and inclusion in the workplace. They specifically call out racial equity. They call out equity for the Pacific Islander community, the Asian American communities, the territories, I think, are called out. So there is, very top-down support for doing things differently and helping reduce some of the past harms that the federal government has caused. And in our own agency, in March, we just got guidance that tells us how we're supposed to implement the executive orders. And so Assistant Secretary of the Army of Civil Works, Michael Connor, put out some guidance that was pretty sweeping and I think allows us to do a lot. And he specifically calls on us at the Army Corps to reduce the disproportionate burden that a number of marginalized communities are facing, including tribes, to increase access to the benefits of federal programs and make sure they're going to where they're most needed, and then also to remove barriers to participation in the decision making, in the planning process. And so at the San Francisco district, I think we are lucky in the sense that the Bay Area is way far ahead of the Army Corps. And so we don't have as much internal resistance in our district to say, hey, we want to do things differently, because the communities are already very vocal in telling us what they want, which I think is pretty great. And so we at our district have been trying to sort of build a groundswell around issues of systemic inequity and how our work, if we don't center equity, can perpetuate it, and different ways of doing things. And then we've also been kind of sharing some of this with other colleagues around the Army Corps to sort of grow the awareness, grow the interest, find ways to begin really moving the needle, undoing past harms. And there is certainly some internal resistance at places in the agency, as I think is common in other agencies, at least from some works that I've read. But there's also a lot of support, and I'm more hopeful now than ever before, and excited to be here kind of at this time. Some of our strategy at the district to being able to essentially deliver on environmental justice, to create more equitable outcomes, to create a situation where the determinant of whether you're going to thrive during a disaster or not is not tied to race, gender, disability, immigration status, etc. So some of our strategy is around partnerships, and we look specifically and invest in partnerships with agencies that have authorities that we don't have. So a lot of federal agencies will say, I can't do activity X because I'm not authorized to do it. And I think that ends up just kind of telling a community no. And many of these communities have been told no for 80 years, right? And so we are trying to strengthen our interagency partnerships so that when we can't solve a problem, we don't drop the ball, we pass the ball and ensure that like this community is connected with this agency who won't drop the ball if they need it. We're also building partnerships with folks who have expertise that we don't have. For example, the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies is a disability-led sort of disaster response and emergency planning organization, and the California Office of Emergency Services, they have a special office just for folks with functional and access needs. So we're trying to nurture those so that they can, partner on projects where we can, and also so that we can learn from them and integrate it into our own. We're partnering with universities, both from a knowledge sharing standpoint, both trying to reach out to more diverse and representative organizations from which we can build and sustain and retain a more representative workforce. We're also partnering, we're close to schools like UC Davis and UC Berkeley, and UC Berkeley just happens to have a climate cluster hire, many of whom focus on issues of environmental and climate justice. And so we meet with them and talk about what projects we actually have going on the ground. And then sometimes they take their students out there and conduct landscape architecture studios to look at more ways for centering the community. And so we're sort of building some of that knowledge exchange. Those are just, we have a lot of state agencies that are further along in environmental justice legislation and regulation that we are. And so we're trying to build relationships with them to learn, like, what can we steal that they're already doing to do things differently. And then kind of the last way, and I want to share this, I am probably running out of time, but one thing is the Army Corps has a number of technical assistance programs. And I didn't realize this before I came to the Corps. So I want to make sure that you all know about them. In addition to sort of big projects that relate to navigation and dredging or construction and ecosystem restoration, we also have technical assistance programs. They're not grants, so we can't give money to communities, but we pay ourselves to support communities with free work. And you can decide for yourself if it really feels free when you're working with the Army Corps, but I like to think we're getting better. But anyway, some of these projects allow us to do work for free. There's no federal cost share. Some of them require us to actually bring in multiple agencies, and this is called the Silver Jackets program, around things like flood risk assessment, flood risk communication, non-structural flood risk management projects. We also have a program that allows us to do comprehensive watershed planning, and that one is very widespread. It allows us to look at water quality, water quantity. We can install stream gauges to get communities more information, and that one often does require a cost share. But if you are a federally recognized tribe, then the first $500,000 of that project is free for you, and we only cost share the difference. So we have something going on with the Yurok tribe in California that we're really excited about, quantifying water supply in some of the sort of newly reacquired tributaries to the Klamath. This afternoon, I have a workshop in Los Angeles district looking at how we reduce risks and build resilience for sort of like a care-driven emergency response for unhoused communities living in and near flood control infrastructure. And we also do things like emergency action planning with communities where we convene a lot of partners and we can help advocate and center their voices when they've previously sort of been denied. So if you're interested and you have communities you work with that might benefit from some of these programs, please contact me. And also I'm happy to talk about this anytime because I'm very passionate about it. Hopefully I didn't go over too much, and I'll just stop there and concede to the other panelists that I'm really excited to hear from.
Jessica, thank you so much. And that was just about perfect timing. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jennifer.
Okay, let me turn on my PowerPoint. Excellent. Yeah, so good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Santos Hernandez. And thank you very much of the work that I have been doing at the University of Puerto Rico as a researcher. Pretty much my work sits at the intersection of research policy and planning. For the last few years, I have been working in projects that are focused on sustainability transitions and also on supporting communities as they respond to the disasters that we've been navigating over the last few years. So particularly the Urban Resilience to Extreme Sustainability Research Network was the project that sort of began this effort as it was focused on developing long-term sustainability transition scenarios with practitioners. When Hurricane Maria happened, we had already developed the first iteration of those long-term sustainability transition scenarios, and the opportunity to reflect upon those scenarios and how that new reality that we were navigating after Maria contrasted with the ideas and sort of the thoughts and strategies that practitioners were proposing at the time. At the time, the EPA College Underserved Community Partnership Program also reached to us to see if we could develop an initiative to provide technical support to communities in Puerto Rico. And it came at a perfect timing that allowed us to pretty much downscale the work that we were doing with practitioners on building long-term sustainability transition scenarios to now bring that discussion to the community and start thinking about long-term planning and sort of developing a vision for the community and the community in the context of the broader city. So those projects have really shaped sort of the work that we've been doing. Most recently, we have been collaborating with the U.S. Geological Survey after the 2020 earthquake sequence. We still have events here and there. But we've been collaborating with them to provide feedback on the visualizations that they've been generating, and also to have a broader understanding of risk communication in Puerto Rico and issues of amplification in the context of concurrent disasters. So particularly, that's why sort of our concern when we began working on specifically on risk communication was that the context of Puerto Rico was very challenging. Even getting funding for work was a challenge because disaster research has always been very focused on event-based research. But the scenario that we had, we were talking about not just residents, but also practitioners that were navigating multiple disaster cycles simultaneously. For me as a researcher, it's an issue that it's also related to the challenges posed by climate change from a social standpoint. So when we talk about the erosion of the state and those broader theoretical concepts, we are ultimately talking about issues that need to be addressed by disaster researchers and that require us to move beyond traditional approaches that are very much focused on events. These are some of the activities that we were doing in URETS with practitioners and with community leaders. Some of the meetings that we held after Hurricane Maria, that was pretty much that intersection. I was called by the PIs in ASU and asked to pull together a workshop to meet with practitioners. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. Fantastic. I think that, we certainly have to have that discussion, but we also have to bring to the table community leaders who are the ones really taking on the challenge of meeting the needs of their communities in the absence of other services. So with CUP, we work in 10 communities in San Juan, in La Perla, in Old San Juan, in Puerto Nuevo, Buenavista, Cantera, Villa Nevares, Rio Piedras Heights, Caimito, Las Curias, and Playita. And they're on the map, you can see how they're distributed throughout the city. And it was really a very good opportunity to reflect about day-to-day life. It provided a reflected space for residents to think about the needs of their communities, how they have different beliefs and values of what is community living and what should happen in a neighborhood based on different housing settings and designs and things of that nature. But it was definitely a reflexive space that allowed them to think about the city in the long term, their community in the long term, and what could be done to promote sustainability transitions. Something that was, and these are some of the pretty much what we did, is that was one of the lessons from this project, is that when we were meeting with practitioners, we held workshops, we called them in, and we will pretty much hold a traditional one-day workshop at a venue where we will meet with them and facilitate the exercises. And that's something that, I'm still not necessarily confident that it's the best way of working with practitioners, but it worked better than it did with residents. With residents, you really don't have much of an opportunity to call them for a full day to devote pretty much their day to build a scenario or things like that, and then do this several times because it's an iterative process. It's really not practical. So what we did was, and also the issue of knowledge exchange. You're talking about concepts, you're talking about ideas, you're talking about methods and techniques that are not necessarily the way that residents are thinking about these problems. So part of the process was really coming in, talking about what we were doing, sharing what we had done so far, and pretty much presenting it as an opportunity to include residents and pretty much we emphasize our interest in bringing them to the table, acknowledging that for these transitions to pretty much take place or to happen or to be maintained, we really had to have everyone at the table. So pretty much that's how we organize meetings. We introduced the discussion, then in the next meeting, we share the scenarios that were developed by practitioners. From there, on the next meeting, they pretty much provided feedback on those scenarios, and then they went with an assignment of specific problems that they found on the scenarios that were developed by practitioners. They went home, thought about potential solutions, and then we held another meeting. So that was pretty much the process through which we pretty much serve as companions of community leaders and residents to think about their communities, and it was a very fruitful process. These are some of the pretty much roadmaps that they developed. This is for the Rio Piedras Heights community. They established a vision for their community, then goals and strategies, and then they work on a timeline of by when they think that they can develop them. In terms of reflection about this process, I think that the biggest reflection is that we need to really work on bringing back the work of communities to practitioners. One of the challenges with providing continuity to this project was really the pandemic and the fact that, first of all, we had to maintain physical distancing, so we couldn't continue holding community meetings for a while until we'll figure out other ways to maintain that connection. But also the need of pretty much turn this transition scenarios into actionable proposals. And that's one of the things where, for example, the whole community resilience planning program, it's trying to really move forward, but then there's also an opportunity to really think about how effective are these programs in bringing together the whole community, or what we mean, what the whole community. And then why this is important, it's ultimately, and I think I'm talking to practitioners, so you're constantly being deployed to these events, and sometimes you have the unfortunate opportunity of being deployed to a place that you've been before. So that's precisely sort of the argument that we move forward in Puerto Rico, is that, you know, we're really dealing with disaster cycles that talk not only about our exposure and our risks, but really about our vulnerability and how we are maintaining, through policies, through development strategies and programs, a system that is not able to really respond to disasters because of pre-existing social vulnerability. And again, you know, that's also something particular about Puerto Rico, is that while we have the FEMA website showcasing the dollars that are being assigned to different infrastructure projects in Puerto Rico, we also have the debt restructuring process unfolding, and that is eliminating services, reducing employment opportunities, or opportunities for promotion, for additional compensations, for additional work for government workers. So it's really creating a very tense situation within agencies. At the University of Puerto Rico, the government board of the university was changed by the current administration, so it's increasingly politicized, also creating a lot of insecurity and a lot of instability within the institution. So something else that, you know, when we going back to communities, I think that one of the other lessons that we learned from that process, it's really that we have to meet communities where they are. We may have great plans, we may have a great program, but we really have to understand where communities are. Their residents are actively engaged in their communities. They have projects, they have goals, they have things that they want to accomplish. So I think that, you know, the first thing that was useful in that project was reaching out to community leaders just to learn about how things were going in their community and what they were trying to move forward in terms of development, in terms of enhancing the living conditions of residents, in terms of disaster preparedness, but very much important to listen. And the pictures on the slide are of the community of Playita, which is right by the Los Corosos Lagoon in San Juan. And when we first approached them with the idea of doing sustainability transition scenarios, they were really not interested, because they were more interested in revitalizing the little fisherman's wharf that they had and the little docking port that they have, because it was very much tied to the livelihood of men in the community. So instead of doing the scenarios, what we did was that we organized with student organizations on campus to move forward with an initiative to help them enhance and sort of revitalize the fisherman ward. And that was also, you know, a very reflexive process, not just for us, but also for community leaders, because it helped them think about their community in other terms, and think about, in more positive ways that they could actually get organized and move forward with small projects that they could actually transform or translate into a reality. The other project that I mentioned is the one with the USGS. That one is funded by the Natural Hazard Center Quick Response Research Program. Through that project, we were able to conduct interviews with 51 emergency responders. We were able to also launch a door-to-door survey. And lastly, we were focused on focus groups. We facilitated 7 focus groups to understand information sources, to understand a perception about different risks, to examine how prior experience and also the familial situation or the domestic situation was informing their decision making, and ultimately the focus groups in particular were focused on co-designing visualizations that governmental and non-governmental organizations could use to effectively and efficiently convey risk information. So that was also a very interesting process. One of the main takeaways from that process is the value of integrating residents in the process of co-creating risk communication messages, and of pretty much bringing to the table their experience to not just strengthen how risk communication products are developed, but also in terms of providing actionable recommendations in terms of preparedness. So, for example, in terms of enhancing the risk communication message, something that was very valuable for us was really understanding how important it was for those that are closer to the epicenter, that live, that pretty much feel the aftershocks because they are taking place very shallow, that their experience had to be captured by the earthquake aftershock forecast. The way that the message is communicated, it says that magnitudes 3s and less are not felt, but they are certainly felt by those that live close to the epicenter, and that has an impact in how they perceive the risk communication information that they are receiving. And also from a preparedness standpoint, just from actionable lessons from the top of my mind, we have the checklist of the preparedness products that we need to have. One of the things that residents mentioned in the meetings was like, well, one of the things was that we had the flashlight, but we did not realize that we needed to have the flashlight on our nightstand because the earthquake happened in the middle of the night and we couldn't find it. Same thing with like glasses. So again, the need to transition from static measures to really, sorry, my Alexa is talking, but really moving from static recommendation and from checklists to looking at disasters as processes and really trying to address the challenges that we identify. And lastly, why this is important in the context of the current policy discussions. This is one of the questions that we asked residents in that survey that we administered to 436 households in Guayanilla, Guanica, and San Juan. We asked them a set of questions to see whether they were considering that preparedness measure, whether it's something that they had considered before the earthquake, that they adopted after the earthquake, but before COVID, that they adopted during the COVID lockdown, that they were considering to adopt, that they were planning to adopt, or that they were not planning to adopt. And one of the findings that struck us was really seeing that over half of the residents are not considering preparing an earthquake response plans with the community. So when we talk about the whole community, we have over 50% of the folks that we have to find a way to engage in those processes. The other thing that it's also very important from that process, from that project, it's really the importance of paying attention to stakeholder perception and the challenges that it poses as we think about disasters in the future. One of the questions that we asked them was focused on understanding or on capturing to what extent they thought that different actors were knowledgeable about COVID-19. And you can see on the left how state elected government officials, non-elected government official, and the governor are the least, are considered the least knowledgeable of all the actors. And then the media is perceived as the most knowledgeable. So we're really talking about challenges in terms of credibility and trust in government services. I think that the quotes on the right are pretty useful to sort of think about those challenges. A state government official said in one of the interviews, unfortunately, the government of Puerto Rico has so little credibility that the media and people believe that the people who work for the government are not well prepared. The government approvals rate is very low. And then another one, government official that has worked at both the state and federal level, highlighted how in the context of the earthquakes, they would resort to federal officials to convey warning information because they were concerned about their credibility. He said, and obviously we changed the names. John, talk to them because you are John Smith. We have to find a way to for the state government to reassume its leadership and credibility, much needed for everything to work. But at that point, we were not there. The earthquake happened just a few months after the situation of Governor Rosselló. That was a major security emergency. So, I think that those are all my points, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Greg, we'll go ahead and switch to you. We have about 20 minutes left in the session, so that should leave us with about 5 minutes for questions after Greg's presentation. So please, if you do have some questions or comments, go ahead and start putting them in the chat so that we can take one or two before our time is up. And Greg, I don't know if you have any slides to share.
Muted. So good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I have a few slides to share. And let's see if this works. Okay. Do you see the slides? The title slide? Hello?
Yes, we can see your slide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, no, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to continue discussing a little bit, disaster-related information in the sister island to Puerto Rico, the sister territory to Puerto Rico, the USVI. For those who don't know the USVI, Puerto Rico is over here, Miami is over here, and in the USVI are the three little islands, or in small islets next to Puerto Rico. We also suffered from the impact of Irma and Maria. We didn't suffer from any earthquake. These are the different islands with population density and a little bit of where the urban centers are located. So like Puerto Rico, we are subject to a variety of natural hazard, earthquakes, tsunamis. We actually have similar risk than Puerto Rico. So the lesson learned and the observation from Jennifer are very well taken, because I think they apply very much to the territory. This picture here shows some of the disaster, and probably seen similar pictures in past presentation about the impact of the disasters of 2017 on the Caribbean territories. And as in Puerto Rico, recovery is underway. And quite aggressively in terms of really rebuilding the infrastructure as much as possible. So this figure here shows the fact that the territory of the Virgin Islands is actually, has experienced a series of disasters in the past. Most of those are hurricanes. They tend to be the most shocking ones. We also had some earthquakes in the past, but I don't think, it's probably been close to 40 years since we had a major earthquake. So in terms of data, we can see that, compared to Puerto Rico, which is in orange, in the dashed line, if we look just at pure unemployment data, we see that the territory takes a very long time to recover, and we're still recovering. COVID certainly didn't help. And so with this in mind, we're sort of asking ourselves, what does it mean to be resilient in a territory? Why? What does it take for us to bounce back, if you will? And so we kind of had to sort of take a step back and say, okay, why are we doing this? Why are we asking those questions? Why does it matter to have strong mitigation strategies? And ultimately, it's because, all what we want as a society is physical, mental, and social well-being. And so what hazards do is that if we don't have good mitigation strategies in place, if we don't have strong communities, strong ecosystem, and a built environment, then things get out of whack, and ultimately this physical, mental, and social and economic well-being is also impacted. As a result, people leave. I think there's a lot of different, people die and people leave. Puerto Rico suffered, I think, 13 or 18% a drop, no, 13% drop or something like that in population, and thousands of deaths after the hurricane. We also suffered probably hundreds of deaths after the hurricane, and an 18% population drop. So really thinking about what does it take to be more resilient and stronger mitigation strategies is critical. So we are nearing the end of the update of a hazard mitigation plan in the USVI. We looked at the traditional hazards and the traditional critical infrastructure systems. But we also started looking at essential services, because if we don't think about how to reinforce and make the economy, the housing sector, the education sector stronger, yes, we will have buildings that can withstand a Category 5 hurricane, but still there will be some impact, and will be a drop in the quality of essential services. But also, if we're thinking about recovery, if we don't have any of the essential services, then the recovery will be difficult. And I think Jennifer mentioned some point about some of the economic challenge of Puerto Rico that for me echoes the fact that we really need to think about strengthening essential services, otherwise the society will also crumble. So if we look at some of the results of our analysis and the impact of different hazard and the loss, because that's the FEMA sort of traditional mitigation approach, is to sort of put a dollar value on things and then start to address those loss. We see that, for the VI right now, the biggest sort of, vulnerability is related to wind damage. We have, billions and millions of potential damage, if, the roofs or the structures are not properly built. But tsunami is also a very much a high risk. Occurs infrequently. The last one was more than a century ago, maybe 150 years ago by now. However, if a tsunami hits, the damage is also going to be in the tens of billions of dollars. Then we have the earthquake risk, and then we have the coastal, and then the riverine flooding. So this is, the approach of looking at risk and sort of thinking about mitigation strategies. A lot of investment need to be thought about for, wind and tsunami, earthquake. But, if you look at these numbers, then flooding is not so much of a risk in terms of total damage. However, and that's where things get, I think, from my point, sort of, interesting in the sense of, what does it all mean? Right. So of course, we don't want any of this damage to impact people, and we certainly don't want to have to deal with this type of losses. However, if we think about frequency, those type of events happen maybe every 15, 20 years, every century or more, probably the same frequency of earthquake. But coastal flooding and riverine flooding, especially riverine flooding, happen on a regular basis. That has, is because development has increased in the past 40 years, creating more flooding because we don't have good policies. Most of these events are not during tropical storms, so it's not really linked to hurricane. Wind is, but not flooding. But when we do have hurricane, they are wetter. So if we also think about it, going back to the map that I showed at the very beginning, a lot of the urban population is located at the coast, which is where most of the water sort of flows to before going into the sea. So the question is, this event that occurs on a regular basis, more or less, that has the lowest amount of potential damage, is it something that we should worry about? And I think yes, because the vulnerable population are located mostly in those urban centers in the territory, and that's where the flood zones are mostly concentrated. So this map here shows in red and lighter color social vulnerability superimposed to in blue the flood zone. And what you see is that regions of high social vulnerability, and we use the CDC sort of methodology without much changes to it. But what we see is that those regions of high social vulnerability are also those regions where there is potentially a fair amount of flooding happening. So if we sort of look at this in more detail, we have two graphs here. One is looking at of those homes that are in the flood zone, for the different island and for the territory as a whole. So of those homes that are in the flood zone, are there in a social vulnerable area or less social vulnerable area? So anything in red means that homes are in social vulnerable area. Anything in light sort of pink salmon means that the homes are mostly in regions of lower social vulnerability. What you see is that apart from St. John, where there is a mix, St. Thomas and St. Croix, the vast majority of people whose homes are in the flood zone are also people of higher social vulnerability. If we look at the transportation, thinking, okay, can those people move around, during a flood event? Can they go to work or whatever? We see that there, again, most of those roads that are flooded happen to be in regions of high social vulnerability. So we see that there is a link that can potentially have some economic consequence for those people who are already in vulnerable socioeconomically, as well as other sort of social factor, but they are also more exposed to this flooding hazard, which again occurs more often than the tsunamis and the hurricane. We also looked at chronic stress, meaning air and noise pollution, air pollution from industries, airports, ports, etc., roads, and we also looked at noise pollution from airports, ports, roads, etc. And what we see is a high concentration of these sources of air and noise pollution in those regions. So in addition to being exposed to acute stress from the flooding, those people are also exposed to chronic stress from air and noise pollution, which again have some impact on their health and eventually ability to recover from hazard. And I think most research is now showing that most death and most sort of adverse impact are not linked directly to the event, but the aftermath. So in other words, those people are starting in a worse position. And so I would argue that they are less able to recover, or they will take a longer time to recover theoretically than those who have a lower social vulnerability. So again, we are nearing the end of our effort where we take a traditional approach to hazard mitigation planning, but we also start to insert a lot of research and information about other sector that are no longer not usually included in hazard mitigation planning, and we're also trying to go by looking at this issue of resilience and how to become resilient. We're also looking at issues that go beyond just reducing dollar losses, which is an extremely important thing to do, but we also try to come up with additional more societal focused type of recommendation. And so ultimately what we would like to see and what we are recommending is that when FEMA comes with the BRIC and other HMGP type, funding, those usually are directed, to infrastructure spending at the top, or now more and more to ecosystem restoration, with the thinking that they act as infrastructure. But we are really trying to sort of, promote, a diversification of the type of grants that the Emergency Management Agency and others should sort of think about to strengthen more the sort of social fabric as well as the governance fabric of the territory, to try to reduce some of those risk factor for the populations, especially the more vulnerable population, and try to improve our ability to bounce back more than just rebuilding roads, which again is extremely important. So thank you so much for your attention, and happy to take questions. Oh,
Go ahead. Thank you so much to all three of our panelists. I really appreciated all of your sharing and your insights. I see that we have 2 questions so far in the chat. And so I think what I'd like to do is maybe start with the first question that was placed in chat. It was directed at Jennifer, but I actually think that perhaps everybody could speak to it a little bit. For those who can't see the chat, I'll share the question. The question was whether, when Jennifer was referring to community leaders, she was referring to residents or practitioners or both, and sort of who's included in those categories. All of you have talked about community in some way. Would definitely be curious to know who the partners are that you're interacting with and sort of how you're defining that. And since the question was directed at you, Jennifer, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah. When we talked about practitioners, we pretty much had a whole list of pretty much government officials, folks from non-governmental organizations, and also folks from the private sector. From agents from different, the ones that were from the government sector, they were from different agencies, and they had some role in terms of decision-making in disaster management in the city. The issue there was that what we had as far as community representation was non-governmental organizations and not actual community leaders. So that's why we sort of launched this other initiative to bring to the table community leaders and residents themselves, so that they had an opportunity to also participate in the process. And then we could contrast the proposals that they were putting forward with those that were proposed by this other category of practitioners.
Thank you. Jessica, would you like to answer the question?
Sure, thanks. So depending on whether we're talking about building a project or whether we're talking about something more like technical assistance and planning and risk communication, like I mentioned kind of at the end of our discussion. So there's a law that requires that our partner, if we're talking about building infrastructure or a project, that needs to be like a municipal entity with the ability both to pay for their share of construction costs and to be able to exercise eminent domain if a project would have a footprint that goes across property and it would be difficult to acquire the land, etc. So that's like a very specific set of partners. And of course, there's an outreach process, but in terms of sort of like the beneficiary or the direct recipient of that project, that's how we look at that. But in terms of our technical assistance projects, those also need to be some sort of governmental entity or tribe, but especially in smaller communities or in some of the historically marginalized communities that we work with, they are both community leaders and practitioners because they know their flood experience so much more than we possibly could, not living there. And so I think this requires kind of a different shift from how the federal government is normally used to operating, which is viewing community members and community leaders as experts, both in their environmental hazards and knowledge and their lived experience. So kind of blend of the answer there, but sort of depends on the program.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you for pointing to that complexity, right, with persons sort of wearing multiple roles. Greg?
Yes. So we, as opposed to the previous two panelists, we are working on a territory-wide plan. So this was not a social sort of. The community engagement was related to the overall plan, which I think is a different type of engagement than what my two colleagues have done. However, I would say that for the public engagement effort that we sort of had, where we tried to inform people about the plan and stuff like that, what we found was that the majority of people who attended were a lot of agency folks, or a lot of very vocal, concerned citizen that did not always represent the entirety of the voices. And they made a lot of good points. I don't want to discount their participation. It was very useful. However, it was harder to get some of the a wide variety of voices, and part of the reason is because a lot of communities in the territory are disengaged, especially those who are immigrants, first generation or freshly immigrant. They are a sizable portion of the population, and yet they're not included. A lot of the non-English speaking population on St. Thomas and St. John is also quite disengaged because of the sort of differences with the English speaking population. And St. Croix is a different situation, but those people tend not to be engaged. The Haitian population also, even those who are here legally, do not engage because they have ties to a fair amount of people, who are, have immigration issues. So all that to say that this issue of community, working with community, is something that was in the back of our head. We tried to do some work on that to include or engage with them, but it's a lot of work that I think we just scratched the surface. But we also recognize the wide variety of peoples, of concerns, of grouping that can be done. And I think that's something that we're going to be looking at, in the future as part of different projects of what exactly does it mean to engage communities and really hear a variety of voices in the territory when so many people feel, politically disengaged, or disengaged for economic reasons because they have, other things to do, or, other reasons. So that's something that we're going to be looking at, in the future.
Thank you so much. And we are exactly out of time. I asked our panelists to please, if they were willing, share their contact information in the chat. That way, if anybody else would like to reach out, you're able to. And thanks to everybody for participating, and thank you to our panelists.
Our session, I guess the time is up, but really appreciate everyone's input and discussion today, and wish we had time to talk longer. So I guess we have a social hour later. We'll have to